Video games are probably the most enjoyed things in recent years, which with each new popular release trying to one-up the last one as of recently. I mean, some popular video games recently are Minecraft, ULTRAKILL, maybe even Team Fortress 2? Nowadays, there's a lot of time, love, and effort put into video games. Some games look spectacular, like the recent Portal RTX, or just have an amazing adventure like Terraria. Today, I want to go back, way back to 1947, when the first video game was created, because this video is about... The earliest example of a video game is from 1947, with it being called a cathode ray tube amusement device. Yeah, nowadays we just call them video games. This tube amusement device thing was filed for patent on the 25th of January in 1947 by Thomas T. Goldsmith Jr. and S.O. Rayman, and was issued almost 2 years later. The game was inspired by radar display technology, with it consisting of an analog device, allowing the user to control the parabolic arc of a dot on the screen to simulate a rocket missile being fired at targets, which were just paper drawings fixed to the screen. There are many other examples, like Christopher Strachey's Draughts, the Nimrod computer at the Festival of Britain in 1951, and a tic-tac-toe computer game made by Alexander S. Douglas in 1952. These inventions paved the way for the origins of video games today. In fact, this is Pong, a simple game that was actually made in 1958, or it's at least similar to it, as the Pong you may know was released and made playable in 1972, and as you can tell, it's a video game. This was obviously very big back then, as the only thing people had to entertain themselves was television, and that got boring fast. So people had to improvise with this. Sorry, I can't get over how simple this is. We'll talk about Pong more later, but let's move back to the original video game. The video game made in 1952 was actually not called Pong, but rather it was called Tennis for Two. The game was playable on an I cannot pronounce that word, but only for display because, I don't know. The person who worked on the game was one William Higginbotham at the Brookhaven National Laboratory in Uptown, New York. The game was shown off on October 18th, 1958, and was dismantled a year later in 1959, so the parts could be used for other things, but what the fuck? Why destroy a perfectly good video game? Oh. Here's some gameplay of the reconstruction. Later, in 1966, someone else named Ralph H. Baer, who was working at Sanders Associates at the time, devised a control scheme to play a simple game of table tennis on a television screen. But he isn't the person who released Pong, because two other people named Nolan Bushnell and Ted Dabney made the first arcade video game in 1971, which was inspired by another game made back in 1958 called Space War. Bushnell and Dabney then made Atari Inc., which you may know as the people who made Roller Coaster Tycoon, and are actually the holders of Pong, with Alan Alcorn actually being the one to make it and release it in 1972. So technically, Pong isn't the first video game like most people say it is. That title goes to Computer Space, or the other test video games released back in the 50s, if you consider those video games. But it doesn't stop there, because there were other devices being released then, like cartridges, among other things. About cartridges, so, In 1970, someone really important in this piece of video game history, or, well, video game lore, came into the mix. Meet Gerald, or Jerry, Lawson. In that year of 1970, he joined Fairchild Semiconductor, located in San Francisco, as an applications engineering consultant within their sales division. Mouthful of a position, I know. While he was there, he made a coin-operated arcade game called Demolition Derby in his garage, which was completed in 1975 using Fairchild's new F8 microprocessors, which made it one of the earliest microprocessor-driven games. In the mid-1970s, Lawson was made chief hardware engineer and the director of engineering and marketing for the Fairchild video game division. From that position, he led the development of the Fairchild Channel F console, released in 1976 and specifically made to use removable and interchangeable game cartridges based on technology licensed from Alpex. This was a big thing back then, because most game systems at the time had the programming built into the hardware. Lawson and his team refined and improved the technology developed at Alpex so that it allowed games to be stored as software on removable ROM cartridges, which would be inserted and removed repeatedly from a console unit without any danger of electric shocks. You got all that? Good, because I'm not fucking done. If the cartridge was completed and actually worked, it would allow users to buy a library of games and would have provided a new revenue stream for the console manufacturers through sales of these games. In 1977, though, the achievement would come, with the Atari 2600 releasing that same year and popularizing the cartridge approach. Now with multiple cartridges being made and them being popular amongst people around the world. Jerry later died in 2011 from complications of diabetes, but his name still lives on today, with there even being a Google Doodle game made for his 82nd birthday back in December of last year. And I have to say, it's pretty fun. I was actually considering making a video on it, but couldn't because of school and procrastination, but here it is now. Alright guys, we're going to be playing the Jerry Lawson Google Doodle for my new video. What the heck is this, man? Alright, whatever. I actually made my own level myself, so let's go ahead and play that. You know. Alright, let's go. Oh no! Fuck. I hate this game already. Grr! Grr, I hate that I put in a good word for it. Ugh. 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 Oh. Whoa. Whoa. No! Oh my god, bro. Look at me go, look at me go. I'm literally him. I'm literally Himothy. Ooh, almost got hit by that. Oh boy. Alright. Ooh, look at all these stars. Look at... What the heck? What the fuck? Side note, I was actually gonna start like a gameplay series for every new Google Doodle game that came out. If you want to see that, then comment down below that you do. We're now entering 1983, which was when arcade video games and cartridge video games started taking off and creating the video game industry, which is obviously still around today. The market crashed in 1983 because people were making lots of video games, and the market was just becoming oversaturated, which dropped revenues from $3 billion in 1983, which made many of the North American companies created in the prior years close down. Meanwhile, in Japan, their growing game industry was shocked by this crash, but only briefly, because they had sufficient longevity to withstand those short-term effects, and Nintendo helped with that. Aw yeah, baby, we love Nintendo. You know, they made the guy who stomps those Koopas. Nintendo revitalized the North American video game industry with the Nintendo Entertainment System,
or NES, in 1985. Along with the NES, Nintendo established a number of core industrial practices to prevent unlicensed game development and control game distribution on their platform. These methods are still used today.
Okay, now I'm going to talk about important things in the culture of video games and their history. Hi. So you have all these fans of video games, and they want the newest news to new releases. So how do you manage that? With conventions, of course. Of course, you know about E3, but that's not the first gaming convention. So what came first? Let's talk about that and the origins of E3. The first gaming conventions to ever exist were the Consumer Electronics Show and the European Computer Trade Show. But since the video game industry was growing exponentially throughout the late 1900s, industry professionals thought that those trade shows were getting outdated. A quote from Tom Kalinske, the CEO of Sega America, explains how these conventions were actually treating the developers poorly, saying the CES organizers used to put the video game industry way in the back. In 1991, they put us in a tent, and you had to walk past all the poor vendors to find us. That particular year, it was pouring rain, and the rain leaked right over our new Genesis system. I was just furious with the way CES treated the video game industry, and I felt we were... After this incident, Sega didn't return to CES the following year, and several other companies followed them by opting out of future events. After this, the Consumer Electronics Association, which ran CES, attempted to improve how the video games were treated at the convention, but they failed to change anything. The video game industry realized soon that it needed a new trade show for their retailers. Enter E3, with its first event being held from May 11th to May 13th in 1995. They got more than 40,000 attendees, and following it, E3 was already regarded as the biggest event in the video game industry. So it was kind of a big deal. Obviously, E3 is still around today and is regarded as the biggest event in video game history. That's just an interesting history E3 had at the beginning, though. Even if it was semi-lackluster. ESRB. Probably the most known part of video games. You know those age ratings on some games with an E or a T on them? That's what this is. It's basically a rating system telling you what age the video game is appropriate for. Even though these things may seem like complete, bad, they're actually required by law to be on there and can be very necessary, with their history starting back in 1976, with the arcade game Death Race being first, which required players to run over gremlins and avoid the gravestones that those gremlins leave behind. And although the graphics were relatively primitive, the game's theme and sound effects disturbed players. On top of that, a developer known as Mystique became known for making sexually explicit adult games for the Atari 2600. But they gained the most attention with their controversial game that was released in 1982 called Custer's Revenge, in which there was a simulation where you rape a Native American woman. And then something just snapped. It's a no-brainer that Atari received complaints for this, and they responded by attempting to... That wasn't what got the ESRB founded, though. Those reasons would come a full decade later, as two people named Joe Lieberman of Connecticut and Herb Cole of Wisconsin led hearings on video game violence and the corruption of society, which began in 1992. Two games that were cited a lot in these hearings were Mortal Kombat and Night Trap. Mortal Kombat was mentioned a lot because it had sprites of live-action actors, blood, and the ability to use violent fatality moves to defeat opponents. Night Trap, on the other hand, featured 90 minutes of FMV content, and some scenes were considered to be sexually suggestive and exploitive. Nintendo and Sega had differing views on that type of content in video games. A port of Mortal Kombat for the Super NES was censored, while Sega kept this content, which oddly increased sales. British censors actually banned Night Trap from being sold to children under 15 in the UK, which was an influence on Sega's decision to create an age rating system. Ooh. By the 1993 hearing, there was no industry-wide standard in place for rating video games, which was a point of contention at the hearings. Sega had already made and implemented its own voluntary rating system called the Video Game Rating Council, which was largely used to rate games for its own consoles. The 3DO interactive multiplayer platform had its own age ratings, determined voluntarily by publishers. The Recreational Software Advisory Council was formed for rating PC games, which used its own system that rated the intensity of specific classes of objectionable content, but didn't use age recommendations. And Toys R Us was just over here, just refusing to sell titles they deemed too violent for children. Lieberman didn't like these systems and didn't think they were very sufficient, and in February of 1994, threatened to propose the creation of a federal commission for regulating and rating video games. Now with the threat of federal regulations, a group of major video game developers and publishers, which included Acclaim Entertainment, Electronic Arts, Nintendo, and Sega, formed a political trade group known as the Interactive Digital Software Association in April 1994, with a goal to create a self-regulatory framework for assessing and rating video games. Sega first suggested they use their VRC rating system, but Nintendo objected to the idea because they didn't want to associate themselves with the work of their main competitor. Then why are you joining forces with them? Instead, a vendor-neutral rating system known as the Entertainment Software Rating Board, or the ESRB, was developed, with it being announced to Congress on July 29, 1994, and being officially launched on September 16, 1994. Nowadays, the system is basically the same as it was from the start, with the ratings being early childhood, kids to adults, which was later renamed Everyone in 1998. You may be pretty familiar with this one since it's basically everywhere. Teen, mature, and adult only. That ends my biggest video essay to date. I wanted to talk about Steam, but to talk about Steam, I'd have to talk about Valve, and to talk about Valve, I'd have to talk about their games, and that would make this video a gazillion hours long, so maybe I'll stick that idea out for later. Anyway, I'll probably be uploading slightly more this year, maybe aiming for every week, so keep an eye out for any announcements, Gift Squad. And with different content than what I normally do, as I mentioned in my video before, where I said I'd be. Make sure to like, subscribe, and ring the bell, and join my Discord server. Anyway, bye!